Hello, and welcome to the presentation on why general education teacher attitudes matter for students with disabilities. I'm your presenter, Shalika Roby. Let's dive right into the research background and information. The background of the research project is rooted in understanding how the National Assessment of Educational Progress, or NAEP as it will be referred to moving forward, students with disabilities, and the practice of inclusion connect, and how educators' attitudes and perceptions of fourth grade students with disabilities have an impact on their NAEP standard scale scores. So most students with mild to moderate disabilities participate in general education curriculum and inclusive classrooms, but teacher confidence is still an ongoing concern. Teachers require consistent and up-to-date professional development on instructing diverse learners, including students with disabilities. And about a decade ago, NAEP concentrated their efforts as an organization to increase available accommodations for students with disabilities, as well as encourage districts to increase their inclusion rates of students with disabilities. The objective for this research is to explore the relationship between teacher factors of attitudes, perceptions, and supports, and fourth grade students with reading scores on the NAEP. The research questions derived from the four coded questionnaire questions within the NAEP Explorer database. But the overarching question that connects all these questions is, what impact does teacher perceptions and attitudes have on instructing students with disabilities? These are the four research questions that we will unpack as we go through today. The scope of the research is to discover insight for school leaders and teachers regarding inclusive practices in the classroom, as well as on NAEP and any other standardized assessments, the appropriateness of instructional practices and pedagogy for students with disabilities, as well as appropriate accommodations for standardized assessments. Let's unpack the literature review. The main themes of the literature review were attitudes and perceptions regarding inclusion, teacher support and training, and accommodations and inclusive practices on NAEP. And so as we look at the attitudes and perceptions of inclusion, teacher efficacy, student effort, classroom climate, and teacher perceptions are all included within that theme. And teacher support and training, background and skills are an important aspect because pre-service experiences, teacher prep programs, and their majors and minors in college all factor into that training aspect. The colleague support, collaborative efforts such as co-teaching, where teachers are working together for the common good of the student with a disability, co-planning, co-teaching, co-assessing together, the best practices overall for inclusion, and then professional learning, having them participate in training and enhancing their instructional strategies. And lastly, the accommodations and inclusive NAEP practices. Students with 504 and IEPs are considered students with disabilities as it relates to the NAEP assessment. For our focus of this research is just students that have been diagnosed with a disability and have an IEP. Allowable accommodations, and by allowable, there are a set of standard accommodations such as extended time, short breaks, small group, but then you have other accommodations that can be within a student's IEP, but not a standardized accommodation for a test such as the NAEP. Something as reading the test to the student would be a non-standard accommodation. Participation in the NAEP. Students that are participating in the NAEP with disabilities are also students that are in general education settings, and they take their state standardized assessments. And then as well as participating overall daily in a general education environment. So the research methodology that was employed was basically the study used a quantitative descriptive research design to analyze secondary data extracted from the database, the NAEP Data Explorer database, and the focus was on 2019 data, and the jurisdictions that were compared were national public schools and large city public schools. The population and sampling was a sample size of about 10 to 20,000 students, general education teachers with the focus on the reading content, and fourth grade students with disabilities in inclusive general education settings. Let's now unpack some of the data. The data that will be reflected reflects no statistical significant difference in the scale scores based on teacher factors. However, concerns involving attitudes influencing practice, inequities, and increased desire for supports emerge from the findings. So if we look at tables 1 and 4, they're rooted in research question 1, which is in school, how possible is it for your students to change being intelligent? The data from Table 1 reflects no significant difference in students with disabilities' fourth grade reading scores based on their teacher's attitude and expectation of the possible change in their level of intelligence. The average scale scores for the national public jurisdiction are consistent at all response levels with a standard scale score of 20 and 21. The scores for the large city jurisdiction consist of a range, but the scores are within about 5 points of one another. Looking at Table 4, Co-and-D was calculated to determine the effect size of the national public and large school jurisdictions as it relates to the fourth grade reading average scale scores and the impact of teacher attitude regarding the possibility of student intelligence to change. All the effect sizes resided in the small category based on Cohen's classification of small, medium, and large effect sizes. And just a recap, the small effect size is considered a 0.2, 0.5 is considered a medium, and 0.8 is considered large. The category for a little possible in Table 4 yielded the largest effect size, reflecting a slightly positive trend for teachers' attitude towards students' intelligence and their ability to change. Now, looking at Table 5 and Table 8, which is rooted in Research Question 2, how possible is it for your students to change putting forth a lot of effort? Table 5 reflects no significant difference in the students with disabilities' fourth grade reading scores based on their teacher's attitude and expectation of the possible change in their level of effort. The average scale scores for both the national public and large city jurisdiction reveal higher average scale scores for students who have teachers that believe it is completely possible for the effort level of students to change. Table 8 reflects a Co-and-D that was calculated to determine the effect size of the national public and large city jurisdictions. All the effect sizes reside in the small category. The category of not at all yielded the largest effect size for both jurisdictions, which is a negative reflection of teacher attitudes toward the ability of students' effort to change. Table 9 and Table 12 are shown here, which are connected to Research Question 3. To what extent does having special needs students in class limit how you teach class? The data from Table 9 shows no significant difference in students with disabilities' fourth grade reading scores based on teachers' attitudes of teaching being limited by the students with special needs being in their class. All the effect sizes, as you can see in Table 12, reside in the small category based on Cohen's classification of small, medium, and large effect sizes. The category of some and a lot combined yielded the largest effect size for both jurisdictions, which is a negative reflection of teacher attitudes towards teaching being limited by students with special needs in their class. Looking at the last set of tables, which are connected to Research Question 4, in addition to reading teachers, does your school have the special education teachers and related service providers to assist with reading class instruction for fourth grade students with disabilities? As reported by teachers, looking at Table 13, the average scale score reflects no significant difference due to availability of special education teachers to assist with reading instruction. However, the large city jurisdiction reflects no significant difference. The scale scores are higher with the availability of special education teachers to assist with reading instruction. Both, looking at Table 16 now, both effect sizes reside in the small category. The category of no yielded the largest effect size for both jurisdictions, which reflects teachers requiring additional support for their students with special needs. Now let's look at the overall findings, conclusions, limitations. There's a need for more current and consistent research on inclusion practices for NAEP assessments and students with disabilities. Research was based on secondary data, which was a limitation, and it has inherited all potential validity problems when the data, was collected. The analysis methods were limited and are only based on models in the NAEP Explorer. And NAEP doesn't provide the exact sample size, which is why the range was 10 to 20,000 at the beginning. Based on the results, general education teachers believe that it's possible for students' level of intelligence and level of support efforts to change. They also believe that teaching is limited by having students with disabilities in their classes. And they have a desire for increased support from special education colleagues. So it's recommended that general education teachers collaborate with special education colleagues and work to support students with disabilities. Participate in ongoing professional learning regarding best practices for inclusion, and also acquire additional knowledge about disabilities and how they manifest in students. Future research is needed to identify other factors that contribute to enhanced pedagogy for general education teachers while teaching students with disabilities. And districts need to look at their hiring practices related to students with disabilities and how new teachers can come in and are they able to instruct these diverse learners. And then lastly, an increased understanding of the allowable NAEP accommodations and score reporting metrics for students with disability is needed to research in the future. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation. If you have any questions, you can contact me at the information provided here.